speakers, you can use the Q&A option and just put your question down there, and we'll address them at the end of the event. So, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Craig Marshall. I am Assistant Director at the Council on Science and Technology. And I'm really excited about this event that we're doing today because one of our missions at the Council on Science and Technology is to advance STEM literacy at Princeton and beyond. And we do this through courses and co-curricular activities. We try to really combine STEM fields with the arts, humanities, and social sciences. So this event is really kind of what we are really passionate about at the Council. It combines art for this particular event, nature, ecology and evolutionary biology, and also technology and machine learning and computer science. So this is really exciting to us. So just briefly, I want to introduce our panelists for this evening. So we have Christopher Lawrence, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology here at Princeton University. We have Bart de Volder, who's the Chief Conservator at the Princeton University Art Museum here at Princeton University. And then we're also joined down the street, down Route 1, by Professor Ahmed Al-Gamal. So he is a professor of computer science over at Rutgers University. So what I'll do now is I'll actually just hand this off to Chris, who will start us off talking a little bit about his work.
You ought to go look at Congress right now.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Cyril talking about it.
Right, so I want to say thank you to the CST and thank you to everybody for coming out today. So I'm going to talk about heliconeus butterflies, which are these butterflies that you see here. And so just by looking at these butterflies and these images, we see that there are some things that look more similar than others, right? So we might pair these two butterflies together and these two butterflies together.
Yeah,
but what's interesting is that these are two separate species of butterfly that are distributed throughout the neotropics, so like throughout Central and South America. And really, these are four separate subspecies of butterfly. And while you might imagine that these things that look like each other should be able to interbreed or to be able to mate with each other, they can't. Rather, things that don't look like each other can mate with each other and on both species. And although these things are similar and have this like matching color pattern, they've really been diverged for like 12 million years. And so what this means is that these color patterns have evolved multiple times.
62 billion years ago, another dinosaur. Wonderful.
One creates the phenotype and the other one creates the same color pattern. And so, why do they do this? Well, heliconeus butterflies are toxic and they taste really badly. And so, as caterpillars, they feed on passion flower and they kind of sequester these toxins. And so they hold on to them. And when they grow up and turn into these butterflies, when a bird eats them, they taste bad. And so you would imagine that if one butterfly has all these toxins that taste terrible to a bird and has this signal, it can, if another butterfly evolves that same signal, it should also be able to be protected, right? Because the bird recognizes this and says, oh, that one tastes terrible. Therefore, if it sees this one, it will recognize and say, that one should taste terrible too. And so this this warning coloration signals, right, not to be eaten. But that can cause an issue. And so you'd imagine that if these two butterflies are presenting the same signal to the butterfly, how might they be able to tell each other apart? And so mates or other butterflies might see the same signal and get confused. And so while presenting a similar pattern allows them to avoid being eaten, it could be confusing for other individuals within the same population.
Constitution protects.
Okay, and so at this point we might ask, well, who is the model and who is the mimic? Who created the phenotype first? And so, who is the original? Does anybody have any ideas? No? Okay, so we can get at this question through like computational means. So imagine that if we like took out the DNA or maybe some traits and then we put them, we kind of organize them all together. We might say, these are ones that are more similar, this similar. If we do that, we can generate this like tree shown here. And so what I'm showing is the relationships between these different species. And so blue is Heliconeus aurato and orange is Heliconeus melpomene. And so what I'm showing is that the Heliconeus aurato kind of created all these different species first, and then later on in time, Heliconeus melpomene created the same, went through a similar radiation and went through created all the other species. And so what that means is that Heliconis aurato evolved, right, these patterns first, and then Melpomene followed suit. And so we know who the model is and who is the fake. And so this is very similar to our art problem, in that we have an authentic bag and also have a fake bag, and we also have an authentic Van Gogh and a fake Van Gogh. At least that's what I found on the internet. And so you might ask, okay, what is being used to differentiate them? How can we tell a real versus a fake? Can we tell that the metal on the authentic is different from the fake? Is the leathering not so good? Does it have like less stitches or something like that? And so this is kind of what I'm interested in getting at in Heliconia. And so one way that we might do that is through looking at color pattern variation. And so on the left, I'm showing a bunch of butterflies, and you would imagine that if we were to bin all the pixels in that image as a certain color, we might be able to generate a bar graph where each bar graph represents a specific butterfly. And then we can compare two bar graphs to each other. Those that are more similar should be a darker color. Those that are more different should be a lighter color. And when we do that, we can generate something that looks like this. And so here, like, the takeaway is that in these yellow diagonals, all of these squares seem to be pretty dark. And what that means is that mimetic Heliconia, like Melpomene cythera and its mimic Erato serbia, tend to be roughly very similar in color space. And when we look within a group, so within Erato and within Melpomene, we see that there's a little bit more variation in Heliconis Melpomene than there is in Heliconis Erato. And so what also is pretty cool is that they use the same genes to create these same phenotypes. So even though they've been diverged 12 million years, they're using the same genes or the same paints, right, to create these same patterns. And it's pretty interesting that Melpomene, which is the model, or which is in the fake in this example, is a little bit more variable than the original. Okay, and so I've told you kind of how we might tell them apart, but really, is this important to birds and other butterflies? So I imagine that the way that we see butterflies, the way that butterflies see butterflies, and the way that birds see butterflies are pretty different than each other. And so here's an example of how a butterfly sees a glandular fritillator sees its other glandules, and this is kind of representing the ommatidium of the butterfly. And so to get at this question, we can apply machine learning to try to answer, how can they tell each other apart? And so here, we're taking a computer vision algorithm, or an AI, and then we're going to present it with a bunch of images of butterflies that have been transformed into the acuity of a bird. And so now we have this model that kind of can sing like a bird. We want to present it a bunch of images of the original, Heliconis aurato. And then we want to test it on the fake. And so how well does it do recognizing the original versus the fake? And so it turns out that when it learns about the original, it also learns about the fake. And so it gets confused in that it predicts that what it learned about Erato applies to Melpomene 80% of the time.
The shape of butterflies?
Okay, but what about for butterflies, right? So butterflies can't see that well compared to bird. And so when we do this, when we train on the Erato and test on Melpomene, it turns out that it only gets it correct 50% of the time. And so it seems like there might be some other information that is important for the butterfly machine, in this case, to classify these images correctly. And so what might be making up this other 50%? It seems like they might have private channels of communication. So here on the left, I'm showing the UV reflectance of Heliconis aurato compared to Heliconis melpomene. And so it looks like Heliconis aurato is almost 3 times as UV reflective than melpomene. And we can kind of look at this by seeing like there's like a gray-blue coloration in this one, but not in this one. And it turns out that males, Heliconis aurato males, approach melpomene females less in the presence of UV light. And so maybe Heliconis are using this channel to tell each other apart. And this really isn't that different from what my co-panelist Bart is going to talk about, in that we can identify parts of this image that have been restored by looking at it under UV light. But that's not just it. They also can use short-range communication to identify and tell each other apart. And They also have specific behaviors that are important for like mating and finding each other. And so to recap, Heliconis aurato and the Melpomene mimic share the same color pattern to avoid predation. They use the same genes, or paints in this case, to create the same colors. And that color pattern similarity is sufficient to confuse the bird, but not sufficient for them to be able to tell each other apart. And therefore they use other signals like UV to identify and to recognize each other. That's my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. All right, something completely different, but not. Welcome. Also, thank you for having me here today. Let's talk about other types of forgery and mimicry. So, in our world and the conservation world, we kind of come across forgery, I think, in two ways. One way is trying to see whether a painting is a forgery before we acquire it in a museum. So I was going to talk about that today.
Plagiarism?
I've only been here 4 years, and luckily for the museum, but less luckily for me, we haven't found too many forgeries just yet. So I thought I would talk about the other aspect of forgery in our profession, and that is how far do we go in a treatment before maybe we approach this really gray area of where what we do as a conservator can be considered a forgery. So it's almost more of a personal existentialism discussion. And as an example, I'll show you here the Ecce Mono, the painting that was an Ecce Homo turned into a Ecce Mono as a monkey by this lady, which I'm sure you heard about in Spain. She took it upon herself to restore this painting. So just to get started, I put up the two definitions, and I think if you read them carefully, I hope you can feel that kind of gray zone starting to form, right? So a forgery, the definition is an act of forging, which is obvious, but then it's also the crime of falsely and fraudulently making or altering a document. Now it's that last part, altering a document, or let's say a painting, which comes very close to restoration, right, where we are reconstructing or adding something that used to be there. So I think within those two definitions of the word, it becomes clear that as a conservator we walk on a very tight line. I think this quote says it well, especially in the beginning. A restorer carries out the most thankless of tasks. Well, I don't think that's true. I'm pretty happy in my job. But at best, this work is totally invisible. If he achieves good results, he joins the doubtful company of forgers. Now, I think that's really what I kind of wanted to get at today, right? So I present this and hopefully will generate lots of questions. When a painting is made, my professor always said, imagine every 50 years it gets like a major cleaning or treatment. So let's say every 50 years, it gets cleaned, and then the painting ends up in the museum. So then it comes to me, the restorer, and they say, okay, restore it. I said, sure. We'll restore it to what? To the last time it was cleaned before or treated before? Or do we go to the treatment before that? Or do we go back to the beginning, right? And what is the beginning? And in our field, that is often called the artist's original intention. Now, as romantic as that sounds, and as fun as it is to go there with a treatment, it's not always straightforward, right? But that would be definitely another lecture, which I'm happy to give another time. So, it looks even worse on these slides. That's good. So this is a treatment I just completed a couple of weeks ago. This is a kind of beautiful, rather small painting by Cornelis de Waal, a Flemish painter, sitting in storage, happily living its life, changing. This is obviously not what the artist originally intended, this brown painting. So this is where it gets fun. That's when I get to do my job. It's even more fun pushing just a button. Normally this would take a lot of work, and you put like these cotton swabs in a solvent, and you would dissolve these yellow oxidized varnish layer, and you would reveal the paint. So you see, it's quite a big difference. So this is the moment where, in this particular case, I think we are pretty close to the artist's original intention. But what is missing already, and that's where it already gets tricky, is the varnish layer. So in this image, there is no more varnish layer present. Very likely, the original varnish was long gone in one of those previous treatments that I showed. So what do we do to make us stand separately from forgers is we add a varnish layer in this case that acts as a buffer. In addition to that, we document everything and we use materials that are reversible. So as nice as, and again, how romantic it would